Tonight, I'll talk to a counsellor who's been banned from talking to staff and been re-educated after asking why the trans and gay pride flag had to fly every day, plus the politician pushing to axe a state-based Aboriginal voice now that Australians have voted no to dividing us by race. Also tonight, bad news today on inflation, what that is going to mean for you. Plus, yet another popular camping site is banned as heritage laws bite. And our Wednesday regular, Patrick Christie's. But first, what an embarrassment at the National Press Club today, particularly from the ABC. It really should apologise. Because there was the Israeli ambassador saying what he'd seen, evidence of the terrible atrocities Hamas terrorists inflicted a couple of weeks ago on Jewish civilians, men, women, and even children, including unspeakable cruelties on a pregnant woman and her unborn child. Now, I'm not going to describe everything again, the tortures and the murders. It's just, I've only just too much. But I will give you a hint. It's this recording of one of the Hamas terrorists who used the phone of a Jewish woman he'd killed that day to ring his mother and dad back in Gaza, all excited.
الله اكبر ولله الحمد. يابا افتح الوقت شوف كيف قتلت يابا. افتح بتدافع عليك وقت ولا وين بروح. ربنا يوفقك بالسلامة يابا. يابا بسيم يابا. يابا والله 10 قتلت 10 بيدي يابا. يابا على ايدي اعطيني امي اعطيني امي. يما يسميك يما.
Wow. And don't think that this massacre, as well as the kidnapping of more than 200 Israelis, including very young children who are now being used as hostages and human shields, don't think that that wasn't ordered from the very top of Hamas, the terrorist group that runs Gaza. Here's one of several terrorists Israel captured.
التعميمات في بخصوص المدنيين كانت اللي هو يعني قتل الرجال، الأسر اللي هو النساء والمسلمين والأطفال.
Well, anyway, the ambassador was going through all this at the press club in Canberra, asking why this kind of horror didn't seem to move people. Why was Israel that was now being put in the dock as the real villain? Yet, incredibly, up bobbed journalist after journalist during the questions afterwards to exactly prove his point, very hostile. But the ABC journalist Chantal Al-Khoury, who has a Syrian flag in her Twitter profile, she made crystal clear that she'd picked her side in this religious and racial conflict. Here's her first question.
You've said in your speech today that Israel does not want to kill the Palestinian people and poses no threat to them. Don't these comments contradict your statement and instead demonstrate the Israeli government's blatant disregard for Palestinian civilians?
Now, that last bit sounds like a statement, not a question at all. Blatant disregard for Palestinian civilians. I mean, seriously? I mean, nothing Israel has done to civilians comes close to the wanton evil that Hamas has done to Jewish ones. But it is true, Palestinian civilians are also dying in this war, even though Israel has warned them to get out of the way. Hamas doesn't offer that little escape. Now, the reason that there are these deaths is that Hamas has hidden its military assets in schools and hospitals and in crowded streets, and has ordered Palestinian civilians not to flee because they want that human shield factor. They want dead Palestinians to make Israel seem the villain. But none of this cuts ice, apparently, with that ABC journalist who followed up with this extraordinary question or statement.
Speaking about defence there, and we've heard that being said for the past 2 weeks, that notion that Israel has a right to defend itself. But what does that actually look like? Where is the line crossed? What number of Palestinian people killed is a satisfactory number for the Israeli government? And considering there are more than 5,000, including children, that have been killed, where is that line drawn?
What number of Palestinians killed is a satisfactory number for the Israeli government? How many children would be satisfactory? I mean, how sick is that? It's not just talking about a cull. Now, Israel has made it obvious that it is trying to wipe out Hamas, not civilians, the terrorists, not civilians. It is no satisfactory number of Palestinian civilians it wants dead. I mean, Hamas may find it satisfactory to kill Jews, including children, and ring mum and dad about how exciting it all was, but not one person in Israel that I've seen finds it satisfactory to kill Palestinian children. I mean, that question is just malicious. Bias doesn't even come close to describing it. The ABC should apologise to the ambassador for sending someone with such an obvious agenda to attack him on TV. But it was, if only it was just activists, journalists turning Israel from victim to villain after 1,400 of its citizens were deliberately butchered, many tortured and raped. If only it was that. Unfortunately, the United Nations, it's disgraced itself again. And this time it was its Secretary General, socialist politician Antonio Guterres, with his yes, but routine, yes, it was terrible what Hamas did to those Jews, but those Jews are still in some way to blame for what was done to them. And by the way, they're now committing war crimes.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people.
What a sick puppy. Israel's ambassador to the UN said Guterres should resign.
You, Mr. Secretary General, have lost all morality and impartiality. Hamas, as the minister explained, beheaded babies, burned families, raped women, abducted kids, babies, Holocaust survivors. And the SG is blaming the victim? You are blaming Israel? This is a pure blood libel. This is a pure blood libel, and I think that the Secretary General must resign.
Now, it is true some democracies are coming to Israel's support. France, Britain, United States, us to a qualified extent. But once again, increasingly it's seeming that if Jews don't defend themselves, very few other people will. And just look now, look at our government now. Our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, calling for a humanitarian pause in the fighting so aid can get to the Palestinians. In truth, that's a pause that helps Hamas as well, helps delay the invasion, helps Hamas prepare for the Israeli invasion to kill more soldiers, helps Hamas build more pressure on the world in the meantime to stop Israel, which you're seeing now, helps exploit fears for the hostages it took so people get more scared of going in, helps turn on the heat on Israel in the meantime, the land of those Jews who dare to fight back. And they really shouldn't, because win or lose, aren't the Jews always to blame? I mean, just look at some of the media coverage. These are dark days, I'm afraid. Yes, they're dark days because we really are at the brink of World War III. Our democratic world, the US, us, Britain, Europe, against the new alliance of 4 authoritarian states. There's Russia, which has invaded Ukraine, Iran, which is arming Russia and Hamas, North Korea, which is arming Russia as well, and then there's China, the superpower that's backing them all. Joining me is someone who's been warning of all this for a long time, Jack Keane, a retired 4-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Jack Keane, thank you so much for joining us. I've been wanting you to come on the show because since the last time we spoke, it's crazy. Now, I think the wars in Israel and Ukraine, they are linked. Before we talk about that, you are just back from a trip to Ukraine. What can you tell us about how the war is going there?
Well, certainly the Ukrainians are very steadfast in attempting to break out from the breakthrough that they've made of the main defensive positions in the southern part of Ukraine. They have penetrated those defensive positions, which was a major undertaking on their part. They used foot infantry to do it, but they've been struggling to create a breakout where they can grab off significant amount of territory. They have another 40 miles or so to go to be able to really make a dent in the Russian defenses and therefore be able to put long-range fires into Crimea where the Russian bases are. That struggle is ongoing. They have not given up. Every single day they're out there attempting to accomplish just what I described, and it's pretty remarkable. They're resolved and steadfast in doing it. They've got the support of their people as well. One note I would make that I brought home from there is they showed me where the Russian logistical infrastructure, all their support systems were. And while there was some in Crimea, the overwhelming majority of them were right across the Russian border. However, the United States and the Europeans, who are providing long-range weapons to the Ukrainians and airplanes to come next year, have told them they cannot use those systems to fire into Russia proper itself. Now, Andrew, that makes no sense if you're at war and your enemy attacked you from their own territory, that you cannot fire back in their territory to destroy the infrastructure which is supporting their offensive campaigns. We've got to stop this kind of nonsense from holding the Ukrainians' arms behind their back and yet telling them to move forward. And I'm going to take this to our government officials and do everything I can back here to have some influence on changing that policy.
I think we'll get to another question of how Israel, in this case, is also being forced to fight with maybe even two hands behind their back. But first, would you say that the war in Ukraine is linked to the war in Israel?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's why. We have 4 adversaries of the United States and many other countries in the world, and that is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And they are all helping each other. Their common interest and goal is they believe the United States is in decline and it's no longer capable of providing the kind of global leadership that it once did, in concert with other like democracies in the world. And they believe it's time to take advantage of that. The United States was not able, with the Europeans, to deter Russia from going into Ukraine. And no one was able to deter Hamas, green-lighted by Iran, from making this major, horrific, savage attack on the Israelis. And these issues are absolutely linked, because China, Russia, and Iran want to take advantage of the situation as they perceive American global weakness. And that is actually what is taking place here. And the reality is the United States has 3 geographic areas of the world where we have vital interest: Europe, the Indo-Pacific region, where obviously Australia is, and also the Middle East. War is broken out in 2 of those areas, and the 3rd area, President Xi is threatening war. That is all connected, and we've got to see it as that, and the world has got to see the danger and how these things are related to each other. I don't have a frame of reference, Andrew, for a similar period except World War II, and this is as dangerous as World War II was.
Well, to this war in Israel, I hope you can ease a fear I've had, General. This war, I think, is so far working out for Hamas, given what its objectives are. It's got more than 200 hostages still, including about 50 citizens of countries other than Israel. Many of those countries, like the US, the UN is saying the same, the European Union is saying the same, it's telling Israel, you've got to wait. Got to wait before invading Gaza so they can keep negotiating with Hamas to get these hostages out, which Hamas will just string out for however long. There are reports now that Israel's army is frustrated by this delay, which gives Hamas more time to get ready for them. And meanwhile, of course, the media is all about how terrible Israel is for bombing Gaza. How can Israel win from here?
Yeah, I mean, you put your finger on the problem that we have here. The Hamas, while they have taken a hostage from time to time, have never had a major campaign of hostage taking. The country that has done that the most is Iran. And I believe their leadership through the IRGC Quds Force has much to do with the planning and coordination of the Hamas's attack, and certainly approving it. The imagination and innovation that was shown in that savage, brutal attack I think has the fingerprints of Iran all over it, and particularly taking such significant amount of hostages, something that they've been about for 40 years. And the reason is what you stated. They're using those hostages to, one, slow down the Israeli offensive that they know is going to come, and two, hopefully slow down the impact of it. In other words, reduce the scale of it. Meanwhile, Hamas and Iran, which are into the public relations side of this, attempting to galvanize international support to condemn and blame Israel for all that has taken place here. Even the Secretary General of the UN did that today, which is absolutely outrageous and a false, bold lie. That is just not true. Hamas is savage, brutally destroyed and killed innocent women, children, older people. They killed more civilians than they did soldiers in their attack, and the way they did it was horrific. This has nothing to do with Israel being responsible for this, but Hamas has twisted that, and so have the Iranians, and convincing people that they need assistance. So yes, this is a ploy on their part to gain world support and slow down this attack that the Israelis are doing. And as you pointed out, it's working.
I find it so sobering. I find it so alarming. Finally, General Keane, the US is right to worry that this is going to could spread. As you say, be facing World War III. Meanwhile, there have been, in fact, 13 attacks on US bases in Iraq and Syria in just the past week. These are attacks by drones and rockets from terrorist groups apparently funded and directed by Iran. How serious is this? What's the game here?
Yeah, this is really stunning. First of all, I applaud the President of the United States for the speech that he gave last Thursday in connecting Ukraine and Israel and what has taken place here and throwing his support 100% behind Israel. Commend him for that. But he refused to use the word Iran. When Iran is in charge of these proxies and coordinating and approving these acts, and that is shameful in not doing that. Furthermore, as you just pointed out, since October the 7th, the Iranian proxies have attacked 10 times into Iraq at U.S. bases and 3 times into Syria. And we've got a couple of dozen wounded soldiers as a result of that. Fortunately, none of them critical and no loss of life. And the only thing that we have done is defended against the drones or defended against a missile attack. We have not taken a single action against the Iranian proxies to take away the capability that they're using to do this. In other words, to deter them from future attacks, destroy their missiles, destroy the drones, take down their command and control structure, take down their logistical infrastructure. We know where this is, and we have the capability to do that, but we are hands off. And it makes no sense at all, Andrew. And for our audience to understand, since the Biden administration came into power, there have been 96 attacks against U.S. personnel in bases in Iraq and Syria, and we have only responded and defended a half a dozen times or so. We have never, ever taken offensive action against them to prevent future attacks. And I've been talking about this publicly in the United States, hopefully with others, to get the administration's attention here, but more importantly, the American people's attention. It's their sons and daughters out there who are being fired upon, and we're not preventing future attacks. We're just defending the attacks that are taking place.
General Keane, you've warned us for some time America's projecting weakness at a time when there's greater challenges than we have seen since World War II. Frightening days. Thank you so much indeed for your time, for your analysis, General Jack Keane.
It was great talking to you, Andrew, as always.
I've just come across a most extraordinary example of the ABC bias on this war. Unbelievable. I'll bring it to you later in the show. I'm just staggered. Now, you thought we voted against this rising new apartheid when we said no to the Voice a couple of weeks ago. Well, as if. Give you another example. Well, last night I listed just some of the mountains and rock formations Australians now can't climb if they're of the wrong race, and some of the popular camping sites that have also now been banned for so-called cultural reasons, reasons that Aboriginal groups rarely explain. Now, tonight, another example, a ban on camping on the banks of the Regina River and Lakes Francis and Canterland in Camooweal near the Queensland Northern Territory border, again for supposed cultural reasons that haven't been explained, been going on for months now. The local business community is apologising to tourists, saying there's been no consultation and a ban that's going to hurt the town and its tourism industry. I've got to say, all these supposed cultural bans after all these decades, often on sites that have been very popular for very long, evidence of Aboriginal culture can't really be seen, if at all. This strikes me more as a power move. So much for reconciliation. But back to the vote on the Voice. 61% of Australians saying no to a voice in our constitution, Aboriginal only group, and dividing us by race. Shouldn't state governments now get that message? No to dividing us by race. Instead, both Victorian and the South Australian government, both Labor governments, they've created their own state-based voices already to, among other things, negotiate a treaty and reparations and whatever. Sarah Game is a One Nation MP in South Australia. She's trying to do something about that. Sarah Game, thank you so much for your time. What are you asking your South Australian Parliament to do?
Thank you so much, Andrew. Well, what I'm asking the South Australian government to do is to listen to the South Australian people who've made it really clear, with the overwhelming majority voting against having race-based division at the referendum. And that's why I've done what I think is the right thing to do, and really the simple thing to do, which is to introduce a bill to repeal our state-based voice. Unfortunately, a lot of South Australians will only be finding out now that despite voting no at the referendum, we're actually still left with our own state-based voice of over 100 people.
Over 100 people, incredible. Where are the Liberals on this? Really, they should have been against this as well. Where are they?
Well, luckily, Andrew, they have expressed some preliminary support for my bill. I think initially they'd come out and said that they'd wait and see how the state-based voice operated and possibly look at doing some amendments to that. But my position is really clear that we just need to remove it completely. We've got over 100 people with guaranteed resourcing, and really that could expand. So I think there's 46 people that are actually the Voice members. There's about 55 people on varying committees, but it stipulates very, very clearly in the legislation that those committees can be easily expanded. And also that if you're going to be a committee member, you can't actually be a Voice member, which is very different than normal Parliament. We've also got a Voice Secretariat to help with the running of the Voice. And so it's absolutely out of control and can keep expanding. It's also important to note, Andrew, that it states within this legislation that this huge bureaucracy will in no way supersede any of the existingly funded organisations that are failing to deliver.
Of course not. We've got all these activists who need a job, taxpayer funded. Can't have that, Sarah. Sarah, but the thing is, the Liberals got to get the message. This is not just about whether it does good or not. This is about thing in principle, a race-based organisation. And as long as it's there, you know how it is. The people that trade most on being different to the rest of the community by virtue of race, they come to the top. People who are assimilationist or integrationist, they don't. It encourages racialism and radicalisation. It is wrong on principle. What's Labor saying in response to what you're doing?
Well, they've firmly put their foot down that they're going to go ahead with this anyway, which I think is a real mistake. I mean, let's make clear that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders could easily be left without a voice despite this enormous voice, because despite the legislation stipulating that these 100 or so members will have guaranteed resourcing, they're actually not required to attend Parliament or make parliamentary reports. It's totally at their own discretion. And which is really almost unbelievable. But back to your point about division, absolutely. I mean, South Australians are doing it tough. It doesn't matter your ancestry or where you're from. Many South Australians are struggling. They're in poverty. We've got a cost of living crisis, and South Australians do not want this. And I've made it clear from the very beginning that what we want to do is support people based on need, not based on race or ancestry. And, you know, that's the way that the Liberals need to go. And frankly, the Labor government need to come out and say, we've made a mistake, and we're going to listen to the South Australian people.
Oh, you make a very good point. There are people, Aborigines, who very much need help. I'm thinking a number of people in the APY lands, for instance. They do need help, but it's got to be treated on the basis of need, not of race, because the activists you see coming to these voice things, they don't seem to need a hand up to me, a lot of them, not on the public teat. Sarah Game, thank you so much indeed for your help, and good luck to you. Now, after the break, bad news today if you've got a loan or if you're the Labor government. Plus, the most amazing examples now of Jew hatred in our streets, including now from an Aboriginal group. Very sinister. And I'll get you that ABC shame as well. Today's inflation figures spelled trouble, maybe some trouble for the governor. You see, the Reserve Bank governor, the Albanese government didn't want voters last time to blame them when the Reserve Bank kept lifting interest rates so often. So they made Bank Governor Philip Lowe a scapegoat and then showed him the door. But overnight, the new Reserve Bank governor said, whoa, she won't hesitate to lift interest rates herself.
The board won't hesitate to raise the cash rate further if there's a material upward revision to the outlook for inflation.
And just hours later, she got exactly that reason to lift rates on Melbourne Cup Day when they meet again, with inflation coming down, but not as much as predicted. It's still 5.4% over the year, thanks in large part to higher petrol prices. And now every analyst around is predicting a rate rise, but the Treasurer was today trying to hose things down.
It's really important to recognise that the annual inflation number that we have received today is in line with expectations. It's in line with the Treasury forecasts in the most recent budget, and it doesn't materially change. It doesn't change the Treasury's expectations for when inflation will return to the target band.
Joining me is the panel, Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer, and Garth Hamilton, Federal Liberal MP. Michael Costa, today's inflation figures, how big a problem are they for the government and for anyone with a mortgage?
I think they're a big problem, Andrew. And, you know, I've been saying on your program for months now that I think they pulled up short at least one rate rise too soon. And I think these figures confirm that. I wouldn't be surprised to see a rate rise maybe next month or the month after. And the reason for that is the core inflation. And this is really not the inflation that's got anything to do with, you know, all these external pressures that the Treasurer likes to focus on, is heading in the wrong direction. It's actually gone up slightly given the Reserve Bank's target rate. And look, the bottom line on all of this, unless you get unemployment rising, and I'm not advocating that, but it is one of the variables that people look at, your interest rate has got to be somewhere above the inflation rate. And you can see there's a lot of room in those parameters for additional rate rises. So I think they've got a real problem. And look, it's got nothing to do with the Treasury forecast either. I think that's a furphy. I mean, it's got to do with the RBA's perception, not the Treasury's perception of where inflation's going. So I'd expect another rate rise this side of Christmas.
Yes, not good. But Garth Hamilton, I mean, it's easy now to, you know, slam the government. Everyone's going to be cross at the government, I guess. But what could it or should it be doing that it isn't doing already?
One thing it could start doing is listening. I mean, Jim Chalmers has shown he's got an incredible set of tin ears when it comes to the economy. People weren't interested in the voice. There were core issues affecting Australian households. And Michael's raised the issue of unemployment. Government could start working on productivity. We've seen that slump 6% over the last 12 months, an incredible decline. It's having a huge impact on our economy. And sadly, we're seeing these figures today coming through about inflation. There's worse to come. You know, the IR legislation this government has put forward will absolutely have a downward impact on productivity. It will have an inflationary impact on the economy as well. And we haven't even seen the full impact of the price caps that they put on the gas industry. That will drive prices up in the long run. So there is worse to come from this government. They need to start focusing on these core issues of the economy instead of, as Jim tried to do, reinvent it with his 6,000-word essay.
Now, I said, gentlemen, before the break, I'd come across the most amazing example of ABC bias. Maybe it's an accident. I do not know. But Sabra Lane on the AM this morning, ABC AM, was discussing the fact that Hamas had released 2 of the Jewish hostages had taken, more than 200. Here she is saying, well, look, these women were saying they were treated beautifully. Here we go.
One of the 2 Israeli hostages freed yesterday has been telling her story to the world. 85-year-old Yocheved Lipchez says she was taken to a spider web of underground tunnels, that it was terrifying, but she was treated well in captivity.
And then they crossed to a correspondent who said, Ms. Lipschitz described the treatment as good, saying her captors made sure the conditions were sanitary. They were all very friendly to the people who'd been captured, and they took care of all their needs. What they never reported was that this poor woman said before they got to the cave, she'd been beaten with sticks. And by the way, her husband is still there. I mean, what is going on, Michael?
Look, you're seeing across the left and the left-orientated media an incredible bias against Israel, and it's just transparent. It's not just in this country, by the way. The publicly funded media in the UK is doing exactly the same. The BBC's biased. I've been watching some of their stuff. It's just appalling the way they treat, Israeli spokespeople as criminals, as opposed to the real criminals, Hamas. So there's a real problem, but it reflects the sort of institutional biases that we've seen over decades in our main institutions. They hate Israel. There's anti-Semitism all over the place. They look for anything to humanise Hamas, a terrorist, an illegal terrorist group, and anything to criticise Israel. And we saw the fiasco over the hospital and the fiasco over the blocking of the passage out of the Gaza Strip. It's disgraceful, and it's happening across the board.
Now, like I said, this woman had been beaten with sticks, and a fact somehow missed in this ABC report. Here is their correspondent saying, in fact, how well this woman was treated. Here she is.
She said doctors came every couple of days, and she described the treatment by Hamas as good, saying that her captors made sure the conditions were sanitary and that they were very friendly to the people who had been captured and that they took care of all of their needs.
An extraordinary omission, but Garth, the anti-Jewish hatred, I'm not saying that was motivated by hatred, could just been stupid reporting. Now, there is sick. I mean, I'll give you another example. This poster at Hope Street Community Radio in Collingwood, Melbourne. Free Palestine from the colonising dumb white dogs. Abolish Israel. An Aboriginal art collective, the Mob Arts Collective, organised this banner-making event. Have you ever seen anything in your life like this? Outright racism in our streets.
I hoped I never would, Andrew. It's absolutely terrible. Let's not let ABC off the hook too quickly, because the point you've raised tonight is the second transgression after the reporter pushing back on the beheading of babies report coming out. So ABC have got form here. They're well put themselves out as to where they want to be reporting this from. They want to be as pro-Hamas as possible. But to see this sort of division in our streets, it's important to remember, Andrew, this is the stuff that we were trying to fight against in The Voice. These are the same elements that are trying to divide Australia on issues of race, on religion, on the unimportant things that divide us, and not focus on the things that bring us together. And quite frankly, in a time of war, which is what we're seeing in the Middle East, we need to be together. We need to be focused and standing with our allies, shoulder to shoulder, with complete clarity. We're with you, Israel, 100%. And Hamas, this war that has started, is a war that you have wanted, that you brought about, that when you went into Israel and committed these terrible, terrible crimes, this is the outcome you were seeking. And we need to remind people that's why we're here. That's why we're in the situation we're in.
That is a very important point, Garth, because Hamas, to this day, is still firing rockets into Israel. So there you go. Michael Costa, Garth Hamilton, thank you both for your time. And really, on that point, you've also got the Canterbury Bankstown Council in Sydney, a lot of Muslim voters there, decided to fly the Palestinian flag for as long as Hamas is at war with Israel. They say it's in support for the Palestinian civilians. I don't think that's the real signal there. Well, I tell you what, what's going on in this country, I don't know, with this anti-Jewish thing. It's scary. After the break, I'll talk to a councillor who's been ordered to get re-education after asking why her council had to fly the gay, lesbian and transgender flag every single day. I've given you two examples already, but now comes a third of a councillor forced to undergo a re-education course. This time it's Councillor Susan Bissinger of the Mornington Shire Council in Victoria. She's been ordered to complete a personal development training and has been banned from talking to most of the staff. And that's after she asked whether the council really should be flying the intersex inclusive progress pride flag at all council offices every day. Well, joining me is Susan Bissinger. Thank you so much indeed for your time, Susan. I don't know if I'm talking to the original one or the re-educated one, but what happened?
I've had one lesson. Thank you. So I'm a much better person, believe it or not. To give this some context, it's really wasn't about the intersex flag itself. It was about we just come off a situation where we'd had consecutive really bad reports from our community on how we were tracking as a council and how they saw our direction going and a whole lot of stuff like that. And so the council employed a whole team to come in and go through and see what we can do to improve our image. And so we had a big workshop, and coming out of that, I was so excited. I was so optimistic. I thought, this is it. We're really going to knuckle down and see what our predominantly conservative Shire will do what we can do for them. And then 2 days later, I get an email saying that the pride flag was going to be flown at every council office for, permanently. And it wasn't so much that it was the pride flag. The fact is that it was a flag that wasn't necessary and was divisive. It could have been, a scout flag or any flag. It wouldn't have been the same. It's just that we were trying to improve our image and just try and get back to the basics and all that kind of stuff. And this just seemed like such a distraction for people that it was just terrible. So I sent an email out and I just asked the question. I said, I was obviously a little upset, but it was just robust. It was nothing rude or anything like that. And I just said, is this really necessary? Why are we causing division where there's no division? We've got a very inclusive community. We don't have any problems with anything like that going on. And it just seemed to me not to be ideal to do it at a time when we're trying to improve our image. And from that, I was taken into mediation, and the whole thing was fully discussed. And it was, and from that, I got a letter from the CEO to say that I was to have no contact at all with all the staff, and the staff were all told that too, which is a little tiny bit unsettling. And then I was also told to undergo a personal development course. Now I'm all into, I'll give it a go. I'm not that fussed about it. And as it is, it turned out to be one-on-one training. So it's just a big chat, really, to see if I can find what's wrong with me and how I can be fixed. And so I did all that. So I've done all that. And then so straight after the mediation, I came up with a strategy. I came up with a full strategy of how I was going to work my way, because I don't want to let my people down, how I was going to work my way through this whole thing with no contact with officers, just a contact with directors. So I came up with a full strategy how I was going to do it. And that was sustainable. I reckon I could do it forever. It was a bit of a pain because the only thing was I couldn't have on-site meetings with officers, but everything else seemed to be, seemed to be I could manage. Then a meeting came up that I'd been part of for some time. It was quite serious. It was a strategic traffic management meeting. And, of course, I had all the people that I know well. They were friends. They were community members. They were the emergency services, all that. And so I had to explain to them why I wouldn't be at the meeting and because I'm not going to say I can't turn up.
Well, that's just incredible. So you've been elected by ratepayers to represent them, but because some people in the council don't like what you say about a flag, they're inhibiting your ability to do your job. I think that's anti-democratic as well as finger-wagging and offensive and authoritarian. Now, to be fair to the council spokesman says, well, look, there's more to this story. There's something else going on, but strict confidentiality rules stop them from saying what. So apparently they're implying something's wrong with you. Can you say what it is that this other thing might be?
Well, I know for a fact that I've been told several times that there have been complaints. And yet those complaints, I've been also confirmed that none of those complaints are in writing, either from officers or from councillors, and that I wasn't even able to be given the nature of the complaints, even after asking several times. So it's sort of, I don't know what else could be, could be left
straight
out.
Out of Kafka. Straight out of Kafka, the trial. You're guilty. What exactly? We don't know. They won't say.
No idea.
You've got to assume it, and you've got to get re-educated. Look, honestly, the whole thing is just so offensive and arrogant. Councillor Susan Bissinger, thank you so much, and keep fighting.
Can I just say just quickly,
good on you.
That I'm not the only one here. There's a whole lot of women who have contacted me from council who are undergoing the same kind of process. So this is not just me. I'm not just an individual.
I'll get to the top of that. When you find out more details, give us a call, come back on the show, and let's talk about this, because a council under a Liberal mayor should not be acting like this. That guy better pull his socks up, I tell you. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. After the break, amazing new immigration figures. I can't believe it's got so out of control. And related, by the way, British police at a huge anti-Israel protest in London warned a couple of men there against being racist, because you know why? They're the only ones flying the Union Jack. Patrick Christie's after this. One thing this war in Israel should make us think twice about is our literally insane level of immigration under this Albanese government. The latest estimate from a former Deputy Secretary of our Immigration Department, 500,000 new arrivals in just 1 year. 500,000? No wonder house prices and rents are soaring. But the other question there is how well we integrate in the communities we have already. That Britain's sure asking that question itself, with its protests in the streets against Israel, like this one the other day, with their banner for a Muslim army. Now, what is weird is that British police have stood by and done next to nothing when around them are being calls for jihad, support for a terrorist group, a Muslim army, although they did pounce on some guys who were carrying not a Palestinian flag, but shock, the Union Jack of Great Britain. And they warned these guys about being racist.
For the moment, anything racist or even close to racism is said. Hang on, no. Let me finish. For the moment, anything gets anything close to that, all right, people are going to start getting arrested. It's just a verbal warning to let you know we're all on the same page.
Joining me from the Madhouse, formerly known as London, is Patrick Christie, star presenter on GB News. Patrick, those are amazing scenes.
Yeah, well, welcome to the Islamic Emirate of London, Andrew. It's great to join you today. It does appear as though London has fallen in many regards. We had about a couple of 100,000 people not too far behind me here for the second weekend in a row calling for Palestine to be free, for the evisceration of Israel in certain quarters as well, flying things that look suspiciously like the black flag of ISIS. We had public servants out in force as well, chanting free, free Palestine, getting other people on the London Underground to chant that. Can you imagine being a Jewish person on the London Underground that day, trapped in a kind of tin can of hate several feet below the ground? But yeah, the big one is, you're right to point out there, which is there were rallies of people from a group called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which literally wants the establishment of an Islamic caliphate and Sharia law, standing under a banner of which has the words Muslim armies on it, calling for jihad. The Metropolitan Police said that they had specialist counter-terror officers embedded within that crowd, and we don't need to worry because jihad has many different meanings and not all of them are anything to do with terrorism. So despite what it all might look like, Andrew, like integration has completely failed and that there's a dangerous Trojan horse here at times, we can all be absolutely fine, rest assured that jihad has many different meanings.
Oh, that is such a relief, and that, of course, allows the police special forces, their special unit, to sit back and have another cup of tea. No need to get on your feet, lads, and do something about it. Very convenient. But your Prime Minister doesn't seem to be upset, or does seem to be now upset with this policing. He's told your police to crack down on these calls for jihad and Muslim armies. What's going on?
Yeah, so he's basically said that the word jihad is a threat to British democratic values, which is nice of him, isn't it, to come out and say that. It is interesting because we're also in the middle of a court case here at the moment as to whether or not a former ISIS bride, Shamima Begum, should be allowed to come back to Britain. So whilst we're simultaneously saying that jihad is a threat to Britain and that kind of ideology is a threat, there is actually quite a significant core of our legal and political community that wants a former ISIS bride to come back to Britain. So we're dealing with that. But Rishi Sunak is saying all the right things. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, she always says all the right things, to be fair on her. But he is faring better, actually, than the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, who decided to go and visit a mosque in South Wales yesterday as a photo opportunity. The Labour Party always has a bit of a squiffy pass when it comes about who to support for Palestine or Israel. They've come down heavily on the side, not just of Palestine, but Hamas in previous years. Not so much now, though. So he visits a mosque. He gets to a mosque, and the leader of that mosque, the imam, it turns out, can't speak a word of English, doesn't know who he is, and didn't want him there, and then issued a statement afterwards saying that they condemn the Labour Party for not supporting the people of Gaza more. So it's all going rather well at the moment here.
Well, the funny thing about the Keir Starmer thing is that he's done this. He's actually been quite strong on Palestine, so good on him.
Yeah.
But that's upset his party, which has got a strong vein of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel feeling. So he does this stunt. But then the preacher there, the imam, gets all upset because people will start thinking that he is against Hamas and he is for Israel. So really, I'm not quite sure whether to laugh at Starmer or be frightened by the reaction.
Absolutely. No, we should be incredibly frightened. We should be incredibly frightened. I mean, it just shows, isn't it, in a very visible sense that, multiculturalism hasn't worked. The integration there, I would argue, hasn't worked either. And the kind of political mess that Keir Starmer is in now, he's actually called for things like more aid to Gaza. He's called for the things that these people want, actually, really, apart from the complete evisceration of Israel. But that isn't enough. And that is a massive problem at the moment in society.
Yep.
People, to be fair, just don't feel safe, really, at the moment, which is a real shame.
Well, at least the police got the Prime Minister's memo. They now say they've charged 3 guys for racially aggravated criminal damage, inciting racial hatred. They were trying to set fire to the Union Jack. Now, what a wonderful little multicultural community you've got going there. Patrick Christie, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Angie.
That's it from me. Chris Kenny is up next. Good night.